Hey everybody, so good to see you all again for the study of African American religion. This is one of my favorite topics. As I said in my introductory comments on the other video, I'm an ordained minister. I actually pastor a historically African American church, historically black church that was founded in 1882. And so the topic of African American religion and even the history of black religion is near and dear to my heart. It's pretty much who I am as a person. It defines my worldview. And so it's always a privilege to teach a class like this and we can learn and grow together. So I thought I would give a lecture on the history of the black church. It's going to be a relatively short lecture, so I'm not going to be able to go into all of the details. You've been seeing a lot of the details in your readings. Particularly, I want you to focus on the Roboto text. That's primarily the bulk of what we'll talk about here and in the class. Throughout the class comes out of the Roboto Fulop text, Timothy Fulop text. Um, but some of the things I say here will resonate with you. It will sound familiar. Okay, so I think I'm gonna, in the interest of time, I'm going to jump right into our talk on the history of African American religion, history of the black church. Let me say the black church in particular, the African American church. We say the black church. Some questions I want us to be thinking about even throughout this class. Does the black church have relevance? Why do we have a black church today? Why? Let's take it from the perspective of Christians. I'm not going to assume everybody in the class is identified as a Christian, but also I know that there are some that identify as Christian, and your faith is really important to you. You're heavily steeped in your faith. So, just asking the question, why do we have a black church? Why do we have an African American church? From a theological standpoint, isn't for the Christian heaven isn't going to be. There's not going to be denominations in heaven. There's not going to be a black section, a white section, a Chinese section, a Mexican section, a Puerto Rican section, or a Japanese section, or a section for the Middle Eastern people or the people from Iran. But it's going to be one heaven. Likewise, it's not going to be a heaven for the Baptist, Methodist, Church of God in Christ, um, the Catholics. It's going to be one heaven. It's not going to be a black church heaven, a white church heaven. So why should we have a class like this? Why should there be a designation for a black church? I'm glad you asked. One of the things that we're going to be thinking about is, from a sociological standpoint, different things, different needs are met within the black church context. And I would argue even that's the case even for today. Whereas if you take like a middle class white church where they have certain resources that many of the black congregations do not have, especially your inner city congregations or the rural black congregations. Many of the congregants are maybe on the welfare. The church I pastor, many of the majority of our members are below the poverty line, and there's only a few what you would call middle class members, and so the needs are going to be different. You're going to, I think, a successful black church should address the problem of racism, because one of the issues that the conflicts that we have with mainstream white churches is people may make the statement of that we're being too political. We should not involve politics in the church. The problem with that is, for the black community, sometimes politics find us, and they're a part of our everyday existence. So, for example, the police force. I've been pulled over, even as a professor. I've been pulled over, and the police officer grabbed his holster. He grabbed his gun, and it was a case of mistaken identity. He saw a black man driving, and he pulled me over, and he thought I was somebody else. And if I hadn't remained calm, I might have gotten killed. And so that's a political conversation in terms of police reform and training and et cetera and so forth. It's not about people hate police officers and Republican or Democrat and political talking points. But I want you to understand, for many African Americans, the reality is going to be different for white Americans. And I know that's hard for people to hear. But let's go a step further. For the black Christian, we're talking about the history of the black church today, even the sociology of the black church. For the black Christian, as a black Christian, the person that identified as a black Christian, my reality is often different in terms of what I'm thinking about, especially when I was when I was a homeless young man, and I was constantly getting harassed by the police and mistaken identity, and I didn't have the resources, and I was not homeless because I was on drugs. There's a stereotype too that many all people that are homeless are there because of bad choices they made. That's a position of privilege to say that. It's a lack of understanding, and so the reason why we need an African American church, at least for now, it addresses and it has historically addressed a lot of the needs that many times the white church did not know to meet or could not even meet. And so that's why we still have thriving black churches. It's not, and there's a myth that African Americans want to self-segregate. Historically and statistically, it's the black community that has been more open to white people than the reverse. The white community has been less open to blacks, even in the church, even in leadership positions. You see that today. You can look statistically and look at the small amount of predominantly white churches that are pastored by people of color or black men. So there's still a racial issue today because there's this mythology that the reason we have racism because people of color keep bringing it up. Well, if you're getting pulled over by the police and having guns pulled out on you because of the color of your skin, and if you're being denied jobs and apartments, you can't pretend that racism doesn't exist. But conversely, if you're on the other end of the spectrum, the other end of if you're a white person and you're not experiencing these things, you won't really know. So that's why the importance of dialogue. Dialogue is so important. So let me say a little bit more about the history of the church. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows but Jesus. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows but Jesus. A big part of the the black church experience is struggle. It was birthed in the institution of enslavement in the South. And the book the Roboto text talks about the unique situation of religion in the South. I think Roboto and Fulop do an amazing job of talking about the religion of the South and in that community how it's different, the intersectionality, the syncretism between Christianity and African traditions. That's going to be so profound in terms of the ontology and the epistemology of the black experience. Epistemology meaning understanding the way of life. Ontology is the way of life. Epistemology is perceptions of knowledge and understanding that come out of the black community. And so you see this image here. I like the historic images of the black church, sense of camaraderie. African Americans were very proud of the way they dressed. Even today, you'll often see, you'll go to some churches at Easter in the black church, and it's like a fashion show. And although many of us, even myself as a pastor, were critical of that, there's some historical context to it, because often the church is the only place whereby black folks could dress up and look nice, especially during the time of enslavement, where they would wear rags and tattered clothing, but on Sunday, often they could dress to the nines and they could wear their good shoes, or they could wear shoes, period. And so dress is really an important part of the black church even today. So let us just say a little bit more here. I'll move on in the interest of time. This is some language I borrowed from a professor some research I borrowed from a professor out of Jackson State that I'm going to share with you. Dr. Leslie McLemore, McLemore out of Jackson State University. So I want to give credit to Professor Lemure, McLemore. Excuse me, I can't talk today. Okay, let us go forward here. I'm going to read some information to you. I'll try to do my best to skim, but there's so much good information. We're going to talk about some black leaders, and we're going to also make some general statements about the black church. Okay. Oh, wrong slide. And as time permits, I plan to do a little bit more in the semester. Hopefully, I get to it. The pivotal role of the black church in the lives of African Americans cannot be described in words short of life saving. So, the black church is really important to the existence of the black community. We're going to watch a documentary. Hopefully, we get a chance to watch it. There's a brand new documentary by Henry Louis Gates out of Harvard University, on the black church. Some of you may have seen it. It's brand new and it's really profound. It goes right along with this course. Now, the role of the black church cannot be overstated in the black community. Has been meant the survival historically of African Americans. So for the black church, it went beyond just, for the black community, the church went beyond just theological, but it met economical needs, it met spiritual needs, of course, it met political needs, and it also met educational needs. And so it's very profound, and even social needs as well. So one, of course, spiritual, two, educational, three, political, four, sociological, and five, I forget the fifth one that quick, political, maybe. The church provided a foundation for the very survival of African American in the North America during and after slavery. So the black church, of course, was founded in Africa, but the African American church, as we know it today, was founded during enslavement in the slave. Now let's remember, when we think about enslavement, we think about the Southern slavery, but before the 1800s, you had enslavement in the North as well, in the northeastern states, in the East, in places like New York and New Jersey. America during and after slavery has been noted that most of the first black congregations in the church formed before 1800 were founded by free blacks. And so you had a phenomenon of free blacks even in the South. That's an understudied topic. A lot of times when we think about African Americans in the South, we think about enslaved Africans, but there was a pretty prominent, not large, but there was a significant, impactful free black population in the South, of course in the North as well. These individuals saw the church as an institution that could provide earthly comforts and eventually heavenly salvation. Those earthly comforts, counseling, political support, largely the educational centers. A lot of the HBC, historically black colleges today, came out of the church. Like the first black-owned, historically black college was Wilberforce University. It came out of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. But they started as like teaching schools and normal schools and religious institutions. If you go out to Wilberforce, Ohio today, you'll see Wilberforce University. You'll see Central State University, which used to be a part of Wilberforce. It was the old normal school. Central State was 1854. The old normal school, and the state of Ohio approached Central State. That portion, normal schools, is a teaching college, teacher colleges. So let me just slow down and say the early black colleges were seminaries, and they were also teaching colleges, because the educational profession was prominent. It was a hallmark of the black community. But if you go out to Wilberforce, you'll see the oldest freestanding seminary, black seminary, and that is Payne Theological Seminary, and it's still standing today. It's still operational. It's an outstanding institution. At one point, I was going to teach there and even take some classes, but life took me different directions. So these early institutions or religious institutions, Wilberforce is still an AME, African Methodist Episcopal institution. The black church has played and continues to play different roles in the lives of their members. The church that I pastor now is it's not just a religious center. It's called First Antioch Baptist Church, and you're welcome to visit anytime. I welcome my students visit. This is a small church, just a small congregation, large building, small congregation. There's been a sociological phenomenon where people don't go to church as much for different reasons. Well, at the same time, a lot of the mega churches are thriving, but a lot of traditional black churches are waning their membership. So pastors have been thinking about ways to attract members and but still maintain the integrity of the church. But anyway, I just wanted to say that my church, the church I pastor, it's in that historic black church tradition. We serve breakfast every Sunday in the morning because of the needs of the people. We give out groceries every Sunday, sometime during the week as well. We do a series of community dinners, lunches, and or breakfasts that are free. Everything we do is free of charge. We do marriage counseling. We do job training and job development. We partner with the Urban League. We've done that in the past. We have educational opportunities, and we provide employment. And so those are things that the black church has traditionally done. This is just a quote that shows the secular sacred dynamic of the church. If I go to church on Sunday, then the cabaret on Monday. Ain't nobody's business if I do. And that's by Porter Granger and Everett Robbins. Tain't nobody's business. And today we would probably say the nightclub or something like that, or the jazz club. Here are some questions I want you to think about. I'm going to provide space in the power on Canvas that you can respond to these questions, because I do want to hear your thoughts on these. And you don't have to go into detail, but give it a good go. You don't have to write a whole essay. So I don't want you to feel obligated. I just something to think about. What was the historic role of the church in the black community? And I've already begun to talk about that. How did religion help to shape and direct the philosophical thinking in the black community? And what role did the church play in this process? So the philosophical thinking in terms of how they viewed the world. That's what we mean by philosophical thinking. What role did the church play in this process? How did the modern day civil rights movement benefit from the existence of the black church? That can't be overstated. Think about Dr. King. Think about Mahalia Jackson. Think about the singing. I sang earlier because singing was and is always a part of black religion. Woke up this morning with my mind well-known spiritual. Stayed on Jesus. Sometimes they say freedom. Woke up this morning with my mind. Stayed on the Lord. Woke up this morning with my mind. Stayed on Jesus. Hallelujah. 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 And that's a lot of times enslaved Africans would sing about spiritual things. Their situation was so dire and stressful in the real world. They had otherworldly things. They had to focus on Jesus. What future role should the church play in helping to solve the variety of issues facing the black community? I also spend a little time teaching at a historic black seminary in Cincinnati. And this is what we talk about quite a bit in that whole debate about why do we need the black church, why do we need black pastors. There's actually a field of study called black church studies. There are people that major in that and get graduate degrees in it. And it has to do with what are the unique things that the black church can give to the U.S. What can the black church say to their white brothers and sisters about civil rights and racism, about social justice, um, about taking care of the poor, equity issues. What are things that the black church and black pastors can say to society that's helpful? And that's what I want you to think about. Number four, I'm going to highlight some key figures that you should know. Absalom Jones was one of the founders of the first Black Methodist congregation. Absalom Jones, his dates are 1746. He passed in 1880. He had been an enslaved African. Um, Remarkably, in 1778, he purchased his wife's freedom. Which, if you ever do something like that, your wife can't say nothing to you ever. Like, you remember I purchased your freedom, right? Like, that's the best gift you could ever get. Just mainly so that children will be free. And you just don't hear that often because a lot of times we hear the negative aspects of enslavement, but that's such a positive aspect. We talk about black joy. That's like also highlighting the positive aspects of black history and not just looking at the negative. After founding a black congregation in 1794, in 1804, he became the first African American ordained in the Episcopal Church in the U.S. First African American, 1884, ordained in the Episcopal Church, and he was one of the first African Americans licensed to preach in the Methodist Church. He was a lay minister to the black members in the well-known St. George Methodist Church, along with Richard Allen. You should know Richard Allen too. We're going to talk about him. 1787, he founded the African Free Society, which is like a both religious and secular organization that serves the needs of African Americans. He founded the African Church in Philadelphia, 1792. Richard Allen probably is the most important figure as it relates to the study of black religion. His dates are 1760s to 1831. Again, I thought I would highlight some key figures as it relates to the history of the black church. He was also born an enslaved person. He's a minister, educator, writer. You can check out his work you can Google his work free. He has an autobiography. Just type in autobiography of Richard Allen. It's quite good. It's quite insightful. There's all these stories about him working with the Underground Railroad or as an abolitionist. He founded the African Methodist Episcopal Church. He joined the Methodist Church at 17. And there in Philadelphia, I want to point something out too. When he was born, Pennsylvania was you had slavery in the north as well, and again, enslavement is pretty much abolished by the early 1800s in the north. So keep that in mind too as you study history. Many of you know this already. So anyway, he had been an enslaved person, and he had been a member of the Methodist Episcopal Church since he was 17. Now, Methodism appealed to African Americans because of the expressive emotional worship, the move of the Holy Spirit that really resonated with the African Americans. That's very African to be emotional in religion. And conversely, I just say it like it is, it's very Eurocentric to be sterile and rational as it relates to religion and worship. The traditional Catholic expression, for example, or maybe even Presbyterian, where one is very quiet and does not indicate whether or not they're being impacted by the sermon. The idea of rationality is very much a European cultural phenomenon. So we go to church, we be quiet, one shouldn't talk, one shouldn't raise their hands. That's the complete opposite of the African epistemology. Where you say amen, they say interrupt the preacher. It's not really interruption. That's probably a Eurocentric explanation of it. But when you're watching a sermon, a better way to understand a black sermon is a dialogue between the pastor and the congregation. That's very Afrocentric. To express how you feel. It's European to hide your emotions. It's African to express your emotions. And the Methodist Church, especially during the Great Awakening, allowed for this expressiveness. Um, so during the time of Richard Allen, when he became an adult, the black congregation had grown at the White Methodist Church um, and St. George Methodist Church. And Richard Allen and some of his colleagues were praying in the white section, and they told them to go back to the quote, the N-word pool, Nigger. I'm not gonna say it. And they would not move, and the deacons, the rectors, forcibly removed them from the black section, from the white section back to the black section. And there had already been a build up with racism in the church, and so all of the African Americans um, left at that particular time, and they formed the Methodist Episcopal Church, the AM, the African Methodist Episcopal Church. That's how it started. It didn't start because black people wanted to be separate. It started because black men were not able to be ordained as a deacon or a priest in that movement, so they started their own movement. Okay, moving right along, I'm going to skip some of these. Yeah. So Howard Thurman we're going to go forward. We could also talk about Daniel Payne. Daniel Payne was the founder of, he was I think the third bishop of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, but probably perhaps the most well-known uh, historical figure of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and also this black church history in general. He started Payne Theological Seminary, and he started Wilberforce, and he was the one that really Daniel Payne was the one that really put forth the emphasis on education in the AME Church. Now, just moving forward, I wanted to highlight Howard Thurman because he and Benjamin Mays, is it Mays? Oh yeah, Benjamin Mays were Dr. King's mentors. Howard Thurman is a remarkable figure. His dates are 1899 to 1891. He's a philosopher, theologian, author. You should read his text as it relates to black studies, this topic, Jesus and the Disinherited. And then he also did some other works as well. But I think Jesus and the Disinherited is his finest work, because he like James Cone in the future, they link suffering to Christ. They take black suffering and they say African Americans can identify with Christ because of their history of suffering, and Christ is the suffering servant. He suffered on the cross. Thurman was the dean of chapel, Howard University in Boston, named honorary canon of the Cathedral of St. John Divine. Ebony magazine names him one of the 50 most important figures in African American history. Benjamin Mays, he was a scholar of African American religion. You should read his texts, his works as well. His dates are 1894, 1984. The youngest of 8 children. He was a minister, educator, scholar, social activist. He mentored Dr. King as well. In 1922, ordained as a Baptist minister. I was ordained as a Baptist minister. The reason I keep bringing that up because I see myself as a part of these traditions, part of this tradition of the black intellectual, the black minister. And I stand on the shoulder of these giants, and they went before me. There's a word called Sankofa, and that's looking back and moving forward in African studies. And so I don't subscribe to ancestor worship like a lot of traditional African religions do as a Christian, but I do believe in hearkening back to for those that have gone before us and looking at their work and thinking about things they did and trying to build upon that and paying it forward. He was the executive secretary of the Florida Urban League, the dean of school of religion out of Howard, the president of Morehouse College. I spent a little time at Morehouse School of Religion, and I had a wonderful time there. And you know, Dr. King, I'm not going to go through Dr. King's accomplishments, except to say that he was the youngest person to receive the Nobel Peace Prize in '64. His "I Have a Dream" speech was preached right before that in 1963. I said I wasn't gonna say say 1955 he led the bus boycott. So look at how long he was active. See, he was going back to 19. He was born in 1929. Um, but he was working for a long time. The bus boycott was in '55. He passed the course in '68. Um, I wanted to mention black Muslims in this conversation. If you listen to Farrakhan's preaching, this is not Farrakhan. If you listen to Farrakhan, he often quotes the Bible, and he often uses a lot of references to Christ, because in the black community there's this sort of blending. It's religious syncretism that the book talks about. But Muhammad's dates 1987 to 1975, 6 of 13 children. He mentored Malcolm X. Last semester, I think it was last semester, we did a class on the theology of Malcolm X and Martin Luther Martin Luther King, and I got a lot out of that class myself. I always learn something from you all. And I also want to say we're going to open up some discussion boards here in the near future, because I want to delve more into the readings. I've been giving you an opportunity to do some of the readings and get acclimated with this discipline, and I'm going to open up some discussion. I want to hear your thoughts and maybe some video feedback. And it's 1934, the name Minister of Islam. The Nation of Islam published his first paper in 1934. Arrested in 1942. That's fascinating, for failure for the draft, to register for the draft in World War II. 1972, the Nation net worth of 75 million. Fascinating. The Black Church is an agency of social control and change. The Civil Rights Movement it's not an accident that the Civil Rights Movement was undergirded by the Black Church, because even in enslavement, the Black Church was a major social force. It's a major economic force. Often you would be an enslaved person, but you would go to church and be a missionary, or you can be a minister, especially the Black Church. You could be a bishop. You could be an intellectual. The black pastors, I do research on the black pastors as organic intellectuals in history. They often were the ones that people went to. If you couldn't get an education, you can get it at the Black Church. It's an educational institution. Part of my doctoral research was on the Black Church and African American education. Well, it was. That's what I wrote my dissertation on. The church's modern impact on civil rights. There's this conversation about Black Lives Matter in the absence of the church, and some say the roots of the church is there. It's just not overt. I'm not gonna get into these videos. New Black Thought took place around the 50s and 60s, really the 60s. There's this transition to the Black Power movement. Black theology. This is where I'm trying to get. James Cone's work. A lot of my doctoral dissertation was rooted in James Cone's work. Black theology has to do with looking at a Christian religion that speaks to the black experience. Is where the modern discipline of Black church studies comes from. Cornel West could also be in this tradition. His book, Prophesy and Deliverance, his first book, deals with the Black church as prophetic. Now, when we say prophetic, we don't mean just for the future. Because when you hear prophecy, if you grew up in the church, when you hear prophecy, you think about predicting the future. But for this tradition, this conversation, when we say the Black church is prophetic, we mean it looks to the past, like Sankofa, but it looks to the present. The church speaks to the present, and the church looks to the future as it relates to equal rights, social justice, racial justice, political. That's what we mean by political. We don't mean partisan. We mean political. The educational aspirations of the Black church, the Black people, the social needs of the Black people. That's what this. So he would argue that a theology does not speak to Black suffering is inept. Again, I try to talk to some of my white brothers and sisters that say Black church is being too political, But if you like me, you've been pulled over by the police for the color of your skin more than once, quite a bit actually. Um, I had my friends die at the hand of law enforcement, and one of my students called me, and they had graduated, and she said her brother was killed by the police. Um, that becomes an issue. If the church doesn't address it, what good is the church? If it's not addressing the poverty in the community, and to say that black folks are on drugs and criminals and thugs, that's a racist notion. To say that's the reason that they're suffering. No, there's some systemic issues. There's some racist issues. People talk about the church proper talks about sin, but they don't deal with the sin of racism properly. Um, the idea that a lot of white people are uncomfortable sitting up under a black person, a black pastor, a black bishop, but many black people are comfortable sitting up under a white pastor. Those kinds of things is what James Cone would deal with. He just passed recently. Well, he was born in 1938. I wish he was still around. I would actually have him speak to our class. But he made such a good contribution. You want to read his work. If you want to go on and do grad work, you want to read him. I use a lot of his work. And I do research on spirituals. He's done some fine work on spirituals. Black Power. I'm kind of jumped ahead here. Black Theology, Economic Development, Black Manifesto. We are therefore demanding of the white Christian churches and Jewish synagogues, which are part and parcel of the system of capitalism, that they begin to pay reparations. So this is this makes people uncomfortable. Reparations, but other groups have gotten reparations except for African Americans. So in short, I'm just kind of skipping around. Has the church fulfilled its earthly and heavenly mission? And when we say the church proper, and then we can drill it down and say, what is the mission of the black church? What if the church is one, as a whole, we can have many parts of the body, and so in that way, there's nothing wrong with a black congregation. In fact, we'll come together with white congregations and have conversations, because the body of Christ is diverse. Think about like a Chinese congregation, where that's an obvious distinction there because they speak Chinese. So what is wrong with the black church? How do you see the long-term mission of the church evolving? Does the church have the power to reframe the fundamental questions of today? And these are the questions I want you to ponder as we go forward. What is the role of black religion? We're talking about African American religion in general in this class, but it can't be denied that a big part of religion in this country has been the church. And so, and again, I know everybody doesn't identify as a Christian, but from a historical standpoint, from a theological study standpoint, from a black study standpoint, we have to take the church seriously. So I'll be saying more about it in the future. Thank you so much. And that's all I'll do for now. And we'll come back together. This will be on YouTube, so you can share it even with your family or your church members or what have you. God bless. Thanks.